Bury this, and your garden won't just grow, it will come alive. Not next season. Not after a truckload of pricey fertilizer. We're talking about a quiet, underground revolution that starts within days. The strange part? It isn't a fancy product. It's a soft, soaked piece of cardboard tucked in the soil at just the right depth. And once it's there, earthworms show up like invited guests, multiply like a rumor, and rebuild your dead ground from the inside out. If your beds are hard, dusty, and stubborn, you already know the feeling. You water. You compost. You pray. Nothing wakes up. That was Leo's garden every summer. Tomato seedlings wilting as if the soil were actually pushing them away. He could lift an entire row by the roots because nothing wanted to go down. Clay clung to his shovel like wet concrete, and when the rain finally fell, it just pooled on top and slid off. He was stuck in a loop. Buy more compost, watch it sit on the surface, watch plants stall, repeat. Then a neighbor said a line that sounded like a joke. Don't feed the plants. Feed the worms. The neighbor handed Leo a scrap of brown cardboard, the plain, uncoated kind with no tape and no ink, and told him to soak it thoroughly. Bury it shallow, she said, not deep. Flat. Then leave it alone. Leo raised an eyebrow. He had tried compost, peat moss, even gypsum. Cardboard felt like a prank. He tried it anyway. He tore the cardboard into big, hand-sized pieces, dunked them in a bucket until they dripped, and mixed the water with a scoop of finished compost. He didn't strain anything or measure anything with a lab scale. One scoop of compost to a bucket of water was enough to turn that water murky and alive. He stirred, let it sit for about an hour, then slid the soggy pieces into a shallow trench, just wider than a spade, 4 to 6 inches below the surface. Not deep enough to smother, not shallow enough to dry out. He covered it with soil. He pressed it gently. He watered, just enough to settle everything. Night came. Wind rattled the fence. Somewhere under there, microbes woke up. They were the first responders, bacteria, then fungi, arriving in hours, not weeks. They colonized the cardboard like it was a fallen tree on the forest floor. They weren't breaking down cardboard for fun. They were building a buffet line. Earthworms don't actually crave cardboard. They crave the microbial bloom that cardboard supports when it's moist and sheltered. And in Leo's bed, that bloom was underway by dawn. On the second morning, he found small holes the size of a pencil tip peppering the soil above the trench. He thought it was coincidence. By the third morning, a crumbly, dark track appeared just below the surface where the trench had been, like a subway route for tiny commuters. He stuck a finger into the soil. It didn't fight back. Why does this work when piles of compost often don't? Because compost sitting on the surface is like a buffet on the front porch. Great when the weather is perfect, useless when it's blazing or bone dry. Worms want moisture, darkness, and shelter. They want food that breaks down slowly enough to hold water and feed microbes steadily. Buried cardboard does all three. It acts like a sponge that never sees the sun, protected by soil that locks in humidity. Microbes throw a party, and worms follow the scent trail of that party from surprisingly far. They move in not to visit but to stay. Depth is everything. Too deep and oxygen goes scarce. Decomposition slows and the party fizzles. Too shallow and the cardboard dries out. Worms won't risk the hot, bright surface. 4 to 6 inches is the sweet spot. Seeds still sprout above it. Roots find it. And the air below is rich enough to keep life running. There's a little trick that supercharges the start. Soak the cardboard in water mixed with something alive. A cup of worm castings, a scoop of finished compost, or even the damp, dark crumble from the bottom of a leaf pile, stirred into a gallon of water and left for an hour. That water doesn't need to be fancy. It just needs to be a courier, carrying microbes into the pores of the cardboard. When you lay those pieces flat and cover them, the soil feels like a hidden, humid cave. Worms love caves. 2 weeks after Leo buried his first trench, he pulled up a struggling pepper plant to move it and froze. There, clinging to the root ball, were specks that looked like golden grains of rice, the capsules that earthworms produce, cocoons carrying multiple baby worms each. He sliced the soil with a trowel and found tunnels like capillaries, radiating from the buried zone. The soil wasn't collapsing. It was holding shape like a sponge. When he watered, the surface didn't glaze over and repel the stream. The water sank in. He could smell something he hadn't smelled in years, that forest floor scent of a rainstorm. If it sounds like a magic trick, it isn't. It's simple biology. Earthworms are engineers in disguise. As they move, they carve tunnels that aerate compacted ground and create drains for water, preventing suffocating sogginess and sudden runoff. As they eat, they pass organic matter through a gut full of microbes, transforming it into castings, tiny, dark, nutrient-rich pellets. Those castings hold on to moisture, house beneficial bacteria, and release plant-available nutrients slowly instead of dumping them in one chemical blast. Roots love following worm-made tunnels because they offer a low-resistance highway to water, air, and nutrients deeper down. Put bluntly, compost changes chemistry. Worms change structure and community. So what exactly do you bury? Start with soft, carbon-rich materials that hold moisture. Plain cardboard, shredded paper without glossy print, decaying leaves, partially rotted garden trimmings. Cardboard is the star because it's easy to get, easy to soak, and it breaks down on a schedule that worms appreciate. Not so fast it disappears, not so slow it turns into a relic. If you have shredded paper, wet it and sandwich it between cardboard layers. If you have leaf mold, tuck a thin layer beneath the cardboard like a microbial starter. Keep it flat. Crumpling adds air pockets that could dry out. What don't you bury? Anything salty, oily, or heavily processed. Kitchen scraps can work if they're simple, vegetable peels, coffee grounds, stale bread, but the moment oil or salt enters the picture, worms retreat. Citrus in large amounts turns the environment acidic. Meat, dairy, and cooked, greasy food aren't just unpleasant. They invite the wrong kind of biology and the wrong kind of smell. Keep it clean, keep it simple. How big should each buried zone be? It doesn't need to be a trench down the whole bed. A pocket the size of a laptop, a trench the length of a shovel, a cluster of 3 handprints. Small habitats work beautifully. In a standard garden bed, rotate these zones every 4 to 6 weeks. Bury one in early spring, one in late spring, one midsummer. Each time, pick a different spot so worms move, multiply, and stitch the entire bed together with tunnels. Over one season, the bed transforms from something roots avoid to something roots explore. Want it to stick? Mulch the surface. A 2 to 4-inch blanket of leaves, straw, or wood chips is like insurance. It keeps the sun from baking the topsoil, prevents moisture from vanishing, and gives worms a safe roof to crawl under at night. With mulch on top and buried food below, the soil becomes a 2-story home. Nightlife upstairs, nursery downstairs. There are pitfalls that can break the spell. The first is depth. Bury too deep and you stall. The second is dryness. Let the soil go bone dry and worm reproduction stops. You don't need mud. You need steady, even moisture. If it hasn't rained in a week and the top inch is pale and dusty, water deeply. The third is disturbance. Tilling may feel productive, but to a worm it's an earthquake that collapses tunnels, flings cocoons, and shreds the very structure you're trying to build. Resist the urge. Disturb only where you plant or harvest. The fourth is salts and synthetic fertilizers. In heavy doses, they can disrupt the micropopulations that worms depend on for food. Think of it like loud music that clears the room. What happens underground day by day? The first 24 hours belong to microbes. They colonize the soaked cardboard and begin breaking it down. Within 48 hours, worms start nosing in from surrounding soil, drawn by moisture and scent. They graze not on the cardboard itself, but on the microbial film. As they feed, they lay cocoons, each a little time capsule that can hatch 2 to 5 new worms when conditions are right. Within a week, you'll notice new tunnels crossing the buried zone. Within 2 to 4 weeks, the soil above becomes darker, more granular. When you push a finger into the bed, it yields. When you pull it out, it doesn't come coated in glue. It comes back clean, like you touched K-crumb instead of clay. If you want to see proof without digging, set a piece of cardboard on the surface at dusk and lift it at dawn. In a living bed, you'll find night-shiny bodies tucked under it, quick to slip back into the dark. Or push a narrow dowel into the soil. If it slides in with less resistance than last month, you're winning. What if you garden in containers or raised beds? The method still works. Very smaller pieces, maybe just a single sheet of soaked cardboard the size of your hand, 3 to 4 inches down, so it doesn't compete with shallow roots. In a container, moisture can swing wildly, so mulch matters even more. Wood chips or shredded leaves on top will keep your microbes and your worms from drying out and moving on. What about orchards or perennials? Target the drip line, the edge of the canopy where rain naturally drips off. Bury a ring of soaked cardboard there once per season. You're not trying to feed the trunk. You're trying to invite worms to where the feeder roots live, where they can build structure and hold water where trees actually drink. Winter? Worms slow down when it's cold, but the habitats you bury in fall hold moisture and shelter. As soon as the soil warms, activity roars back and cocoons hatch. If you live where winters are brutal, this becomes your jumpstart. Don't dig everything up in spring out of curiosity. Let be. Let the engine idle under the hood. There's a moment in late summer that Leo still remembers. After months of rotating his buried pockets and keeping a blanket of mulch on top, he pulled a carrot and found it long and straighter than any he had grown. A web of fine roots patterned the white core like frost. He brushed soil away, and instead of heavy clods, it fell off like crumbs. When he watered, the bed didn't slurp and spit it back. It drank. The pepper plant that used to sulk was now pushing new growth after a heat wave instead of folding. He scratched a line in the bed with his finger and found a tiny, semi-transparent worm cocoon, proof that this wasn't a visitor's camp. It was a home. There's another question. Why not just buy worms? You can, but if the environment isn't ready, if it's dry, salty, compacted, and bright, they won't stay. Worms don't need to be purchased. They need to be invited. Buried, soaked cardboard is an invitation written in a language they understand. Moisture, shelter, steady food, and quiet. Keep the invitation open, and they will arrive from surrounding soil, bring friends, and raise their young right there. If you want to combine methods, you can. A light, monthly top dress of compost under the mulch adds a steady trickle of nutrients above, while the buried pockets feed and house worms below. Think of it as a two-tiered strategy. Plants get a sip at the surface. Roots and microbes get a feast beneath. There are details that seem small but matter. Tear off any tape or glossy labels from cardboard before soaking. Use plain paper, not shiny magazines. If your water is heavily chlorinated, let a bucket sit overnight before you mix in compost. The chlorine dissipates, and microbes appreciate the kinder bath. If you want to test different depths, do it, but mark your spots. Too many gardeners forget where they buried their experiments and end up double digging the evidence. There's also the myth that worms show up only after years. In a garden ignored, yes. In a garden invited, no. When conditions are right, moist, cool, dark, with slow food, worms move surprisingly fast. They follow moisture gradients and faint chemical cues the way we follow a smell from a kitchen doorway. Once they arrive, their biology does the rest. Tunnels carve airflow, castings glue crumbs into stable aggregates, and water, instead of becoming a flash flood, trickles and rests where roots need it. Let's recap the quiet rules that flip a dead bed into a living one. Soak the right materials. Plain cardboard is perfect. Give it a bath that's alive. Water mixed with a cup of worm castings or a scoop of finished compost to inoculate it with microbes. Bury shallow, not deep. 4 to 6 inches below the surface is the sweet zone where oxygen, moisture, and roots meet. Lay it flat. Don't crumple, don't wad. You're building a steady, moist platform, not a ball that dries out. Cover and water gently, enough to settle the soil. Keep the bed evenly moist in the days that follow. Mulch the surface. 2 to 4 inches of leaves, straw, or wood chips maintains moisture, moderates temperature, and shelters nightly feeding. Repeat strategically. Rotate new pockets every 4 to 6 weeks during the growing season, so worms spread their tunnels throughout the bed. Avoid the killers. No heavy salts, oils, or synthetic blasts. No deep burying. No letting the soil turn to dust. No tilling that collapses tunnels and shatters cocoons. Notice what changes. The soil smell shifts. Water sinks in. Tunnels appear. Plants respond. And when you lift a handful of soil, it holds together not because it's sticky, but because it's structured, glued by biology, not by compaction. Leo's last experiment was the one that convinced him forever. He dug 2 shallow pockets in 2 identical beds, 6 feet apart, on the same day. In one, he buried soaked cardboard inoculated with a compost mix. In the other, he spread a thick layer of store-bought compost on the surface and raked it in lightly. He mulched both. 2 weeks later, he pushed a wooden skewer into each. The buried bed welcomed it. The skewer slid in with a soft shush. The surface-only bed pushed back like a stubborn door. 3 weeks later, he raked aside mulch in both and gently scraped the soil. One bed crumbled. The other still clumped. Both had compost. Only one had a community. By the end of the season, it didn't look like the same garden. The tomatoes didn't topple in every breeze because their roots had found anchoring tunnels. The peppers set fruit late into heat that used to shut them down. When the first cold rain arrived, water didn't stand like a mirror. It disappeared into the soil, storing itself for the dry week that followed. That's the thing about worm-made soil. It forgives mistakes. It doesn't punish you the moment you miss a watering or a day runs hot. It buffers, cushions, and steadies. You don't need special tools. You don't need a truck. You need a bucket, some plain cardboard, a handful of living compost, and a shovel. And you need to bury the idea that fertility comes only from what you pour on top. Real fertility comes from a partnership. Lay down the invitation, and the partners show up. Walk out to your beds. Cut simple rectangles of cardboard. Soak them in a rough compost mix. Lift the soil 4 to 6 inches. Set the pieces down flat like notes in a secret language. Cover them and water to settle. Mulch above. Then let time do what time does underground, quietly and without ceremony. In a few days, poke around. In a few weeks, pull a plant and look at the roots.